Hello, everybody. Today we have a guest, Bert Terhart, an oceanographer by training, a software engineer by profession, and lifelong explorer at heart. He's combined advanced degrees in math, physics, and physical oceanography with a knack for building software tools used by healthcare professionals around the world. Beyond his achievements in tech and business, Bert has sailed over 45,000 miles of open ocean, championing citizen science and environmental responsibility every step of the way. So let's dive into his journey of discovery, entrepreneurship, and advocacy. Hello and welcome, Bert.
Yes, it's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today. I'm sure there's lots to talk about, and it might seem ever so strange to have all these things bound together in one lifetime, I guess. But there is a common thread to it all, and I think that would be interesting to talk about. But I've been very fortunate to live a
Interesting.
life where I've been able to pursue my passions. I just haven't been able to say no to things I really want to do. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, but I've been able to do that in a way that combines all the things I really love into one great big beautiful soup, as I suppose you could say.
I think you'd rather try everything rather than just, think about it and miss opportunities. All right. So what is it you are doing now?
Well, I'm the chief technical officer for one of Canada's largest medical clinics. We see something like 1,000 patients a day. We have 20 doctors, 20 medical assistants. We have easily that many staff and more. So everything is run. Everything is run basically online. So we have group medical visits where there'll be 200 patients. We'll see a single practitioner, and all that is run using software that I've written as a result of spending almost my entire professional career in the healthcare niche. And then beyond that, I've also started up and sold two other software companies. Again, always in the health niche. And my third and latest endeavor is called LeadBrain.ai, where my father was a small businessman. I grew up in a small town. I live in a small town, so I have a real soft spot for small business. And fundamentally, the question that they all have is they're worried that if this customer is going to be their last customer, or if the customer that walks in the door, the next customer is going to be their last customer. So we use IT automation and specifically AI now, of course, to ensure that small businesses that we work with never have to ask that question, because there's literally a flood of customers that that they have, so that they can pick and choose. It's one thing to have a bunch of customers.
Mhm.
It's one thing to have a bunch of customers that you want to work with. Those are two wildly different things. So those are my endeavors in the tech field, and I've been in the tech field ever since I was a scientist. So it's not a field I've ever strayed away from. My formal training as a scientist was all about using a programmer to create large scale numerical models of oceanic circulation. So I got started programming at a very early age, and I hated it. The first time I said the last thing I want to do for my life is sit down on one of these computers, but here I am. And and you had mentioned in the intro about my efforts and advocacy towards citizen science, and that's something that I've been able to combine with my adventures and my explorations, whether it's sailing around the world or sailing up into the Bering Sea, out to the Aleutian Islands, or actually paddling across Canada. There's all this common thread that we can talk about if we want to. We don't have to, about how all that adds up. That's it in a nutshell.
Interesting, very interesting. I myself have some relation with healthcare. I'm like head of engineering in a project, also working with clinics, and there's
Mm-hmm.
a large number of patients and a lot of clinics. It's like a SaaS platform, so been working with that kind of stuff for a while now. Before that, also had a client. It was, I think, uh, most funded in the whole Europe, like a
Wow.
healthcare startup. hospital at home and medical trials stuff. So, and the interesting thing was like mobile app was classified as class 2B under MDR. So it's a kind of like laparoscope danger level of the mobile phone application. So we'll see.
You know firsthand how difficult doctors can be to work with. They
Yes.
they are a peculiar lot. And one of the first things I did for this company was they were involved in a clinical trial, a multidisciplinary, multi-clinic, properly funded or NSERC funded, so National Science and Engineering Research Council funded grant from the government of Canada, and it was looking into chronic diseases associated with morbid obesity. So that's how I sort of got stuck into this clinic. But I wrote all the software that captured all the data and then collated the data in a way that was then spit out to the scientists and the statisticians. So that sounds like something that you'd be familiar with.
Yes. Well, I was mostly focusing on features on that app, various questionnaires like Oxford license questionnaires for post-surgical things, to track the patient's state. But, maybe, let's say, less science, more operations probably in that area, but still a similar field. Cool. All right. So let's probably get to the very beginning. And so we now know where you are at currently. Let's see where it all started. So I see, all sorts of degrees in math, physics, and oceanography. So how did it all start?
So when I left high school and was headed to university, the only place that in Canada that you could get an undergraduate degree in physical oceanography was at military college. So I decided I'll go to military college. I'll get a degree, an undergraduate degree in physics and physical oceanography, and that will set me up for graduate studies in physics and physical oceanography. And of course, I was the only place that, well, theoretically, I guess the only place that you can do oceanography if you're in the Canadian Armed Forces at the time was the Navy. So I go to military college, and when it came time to be classified, so I'm in this program. When it came time to be classified, I discover I'm almost completely colorblind. So I see basically, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being black and white, I'm a 9. So I see basically grayscale. That's all I see. If you go out on a moonlit night where there's no color, or you don't perceive any color, that's my worldview. So the Navy's no longer an option. So I'm told I have 2 choices. I can be in the Army or I can be in the Army. What is it you want to do? So I wasn't prepared to quit. So I ended up in the Army. I ended up in the Canadian Special Service Force, which is the equivalent, I'd say, of the U.S. Delta Force or the British small boat service, that sort of thing. And that was all very exciting and very fun. But as soon as my time was up, I went to graduate school. So I left the Army and then I ended up at UBC, the University of British Columbia here in Vancouver, studying physics and then applied math. So physical oceanography. I studied large-scale oceanic scale waves in the ocean. So if you think of El Nino or La Nina, it's in the Pacific. Those are basically oceanic scale waves that manifest, or their signal is either sea surface temperature or something in the atmosphere. So I studied that sort of thing. And of course, to study that sort of thing, you need to be able to write a computer model and describe, what's happening. So I ended up, getting these degrees to understand the physics of it. And then to describe the physics, I needed a computer to do it. So there I am programming, doing the thing I thought I would never do. And I very quickly realized that academia really wasn't going to be my calling. So I had more diverse interests, I suppose, than just this singular focus. And I got the opportunity, again, not being able to say no to things I really like, by a very close friend of mine who was opening a clinic in California. And he said, we need a programmer. And at the time, there weren't computers in doctors' offices. So I'm dating myself. This is a long time ago. we need
Mm-hmm.
software to run this clinic. We need software to do the differential diagnosis. We need software that runs all the that 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 runs that tells the machines what the dosages of things are. We need software that understands the or that can relate and correlate the side effects of all the different drugs that we were using. And he wanted to do it. He wanted to be very, 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 very specific about it. And he wanted to be very exact. And then we had patient management software. So I wrote all the software that ran that clinic from beginning to end. Patient in, patient out, doctor in, doctor out, everything. Patient compliance tools, everything. And then other
Wow.
clinics got wind of what we were doing, and that business took off. So the clinic was one thing, and then there was the software development. And that was the first software company that I sold. And then we got involved with a very, very large company in the United States called Metagenics, since been sold. And we wrote software for them that their doctors were using as differential diagnostic tools. And that was wildly successful. That ended up being in 2,500 doctors' offices in Canada, the United States, Great Britain, New Zealand, and Australia. And that was the second software company we sold. And then I've spent a good many years now working with the same doctor, but growing this clinic here in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had a long-term relationship, me and this fellow, and it's all, like I said, I've always been in the healthcare field, and that's sort of how it all sort of ended up. But I've basically just fallen into this. It wasn't something I laid out and said I'm going to do this. It was
Mm-hmm.
something that just fell into my lap, and it's pretty hard as an entrepreneur. It's pretty hard to say no to what you perceive to be really good opportunities, especially if you get to work with people you really like and trust. I mean, that's an unbelievable privilege, and I would think it's one of the best things about being an entrepreneur is that you get to pick those people you work with.
Well, I'm not sure if that is that easy. Well, you
Yes.
as
No.
for people as an entrepreneurs, there's no like a real line waiting for you to pick them,
No.
right?
No. No.
How
But
do you find them?
well, it gets if you're really good at what you do. I'm not saying by any stretch I'm really good at what I do. That's not the point. If you're really good at what you do, then people will find you. Like, you don't have to go out and actually, blow
True.
your own horn. People find you, and then you get to pick and choose who those clients might be, and you get to pick the best opportunities. And the same with venture capital. If you're really good at what you do, then you get to pick and choose as to who you want to partner with. And it's a very, like you say, it's not easy to do, but it begins with you. You have to be the one that's really good at what you do. Like, it's a very, very difficult sell to sell a venture capitalist on something that you do poorly. I mean, just think of that. That makes no sense at all. That's not the venture capitalist you want to work with, some guy who can't differentiate, between good and bad. So, and I've been very lucky to have worked with this fellow, Dr. Lyon, who's exceptionally good at what he does. It's the same way. It's the same way when you go out looking for a mentor. You want to find the best person possible to help you over those hurdles that you don't exactly see a way over, or to certainly point out the hurdles that you're going to be facing, whether you know it or not, and whether you like it or not. So it makes sense to find the best
Mm-hmm.
mentor as opposed to the worst mentor. So that's another iteration of working with people you really, really like. Most of the people I know that have mentors have been with those mentors for years, like not just a month or 2 months, but there's something
Sure.
that resonates with them. And as an entrepreneur, you would know this as well. You hire slow and fire fast. Then that's the same with the people that are really close to you. You have to be careful who you let into the inner circle, because it can be completely uplifting and motivating, or it can be toxic, and it could spell the end of what it is that you're really passionate about.
Correct. Well, is it a misconception that it seems that a lot of people might think that you just need to have an idea and hustle really hard to get investment and people around you, and it's not really mentioned that much that you need to be super good at something. It's more,
Yeah.
Putting an accent on that you need to hustle and sell a lot like crazy.
Well, there's two things there. You have to meet people where they are. So you have to go, whether it's a mentor or whether it's, or and specifically your customers, you have to go to where they are. You can't expect them to come to you. And you don't have to be good, and you don't have to be smart or talented, but you have to be persistent. The world is full of, I mean,
Mm.
William Blake said this in the 17th century. William Blake is he's one of he's probably England's best artist in the sense of polymath, good at everything. He was good at math. He was a great writer. He was a poet. He was a sculptor. He was an artist. He was all these things. And he said, execution is the chariot of genius. Like there's a million good ideas, and there's only a handful of people that can actually, execute on those ideas. And if you look
All right.
if you look around the world, the people who are wildly successful just get stuff done. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad, they just get stuff done. So if you're headed down the wrong path and you can execute really well, you'll figure out that you're headed down the wrong path really quickly, and then you can change course. But if you execute poorly, then you'll be on the wrong path for a very long period of time before you realize you're barking up the wrong tree. So what you have to be is persistent. You have to be, you need to be persistent. I mean, by definition, if you're meeting your customers or your ideal customers where they are, then chances are that you have a good idea, that you're in the right place at the right time, and you have something that's worth pursuing. If you expect your customers to come to you, then you're making a fundamental mistake, which is, I am the market. Like, I am the market, which is untrue. I just might have a good idea, which might be wildly disparate or separate from the market. I mean, as a tech guy, I basically have tech blinders on all the time. So it's a real challenge for me to take the blinders off and actually see what it is that I want to push into the marketplace. But if you can take those blinders off and again meet your customers, or have your idea be in a place far removed from you, but actually embedded in the market, then chances are you're going to succeed. And I think if you can look around the world and people who've been successful and realize that. So think of big scale things. Think of Steve Jobs. Well, think of Bill Gates, because this might even be easier. So he buys DOS. He actually buys it. He doesn't write a single line of code. His partner may have written something, and he takes that code, DOS, and runs it up the flagpole at IBM. So he goes to IBM. He goes to where IBM is and says, this is what we have. This is how I think it can serve you. He doesn't wait for IBM to come to him. So he's meeting his market where they are, as opposed to IBM coming to him. So Steve Jobs did the same thing, but he understood that the marketplace, there was a place in the market for a tool that was wildly different than the PC. So he met the market where they needed to be met, which is they need something simpler. So he comes up with something simpler. If you think of Tesla left Europe and he came to work with Thomas Edison. He worked for peanuts for Thomas Edison. So he came to Thomas Edison. He didn't wait for Thomas Edison to come to him. He went to Thomas Edison, said, hire me. Thomas Edison gave him a chance and said, okay, prove that you're actually any good. And he persisted with Thomas Edison for years and years and years before he was finally let loose on his own. So he met the market where it is. He went to Thomas Edison. He persisted, and then eventually he succeeded. Of course, he was very good, but he was persistent primarily. Had he not persisted and gone back to Europe, we would know nothing about Tesla. So it's both things. You can't rely on just your talent, because the world is full of talented people who have gone nowhere and super smart people who have not succeeded in any real way. And you can't just persist without actually going and meeting the market where it is, because then you're just working in isolation and no one will ever know who you are.
Very good words. Come total true. All right. So one more question. So you mentioned that you chose academic paths. So you want to be a scientist. And then you met programming because you had to do those models, right, for everything. And I understand that you didn't really like programming that much.
That's right.
And yet you left the tech
Well,
this world,
yeah, there's
and then you wrote this whole software and
yeah,
everything.
it's I know. I only have myself to blame. So there's well, when I was a scientist, there was, and I remember I wanted to be in the Navy. That couldn't happen. And then when I became an oceanographer, I wanted to go to sea. That's the kind of oceanography I wanted to do. I wanted to go to sea, make measurements. And at the time that I chose to do that, the Canadian government defunded all shipboard research. So there was no more ships going to sea. So there was a disincentive for me to remain in science, certainly that one. But there's an element of programming, and I know you'll appreciate this, that's incredibly creative. There's 1,000 different ways, to solve a problem programmatically, and there's only one or two ways that are really elegant and really good. Everything else is just sort of fooling around. So, and the same sort of thing exists in science. You're presented with a very thorny problem, a difficult problem, and there's probably 1,000 ways to attack it that are just like hitting it with a hammer. But there's only a couple of ways that are really elegant and that end up with really sort of beautiful, simple, profound solutions. And in that way, those two things are very similar. Like I love the creative element of programming. I love I love looking at a difficult problem and coming up with a very elegant solution. And it turns out that the tools that I'm using just happen to be the computer. So I can see past the drudgery of sitting in front of a computer, and banging away in a keyboard. And perhaps that fueled some of my other interests. And actually, so when I leave, the keyboard, I leave it like I'm on a sailboat. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm leaving it completely behind. But the thread again that ties those two, the disparate things together, are the fact that they're both incredibly creative.
Interesting. And then the next is entrepreneurship. You were entrepreneur the whole time from the very beginning,
Yeah.
or you found it, when you were in science? So you were already.
Well, I think that
You knew that.
when I was in science, you work with people you like. My PhD supervisor was someone that I liked. I liked the other members of the faculty. Some of the students that were there are still some of my friends. Obviously, I have lifelong friends from there. So I liked the fact that I was working with people I really liked. And when I was in the Army, you get to work with very, very competent people, which is a real privilege. And as an entrepreneur, I get to work with, you get to choose to work with people you like. And it's a risk, right? You take a big risk by saying, okay, I want to work with this person. I really like them. I like the way they see the world. I like what they're trying to do. I see the value in it. I see that I can be making a difference as opposed to just, working some other kind of job. And if I were to just enter the workforce and say I was an accountant in a big six firm or one of the major accounting firms, then that wouldn't appeal to me. You end up working with people you may not necessarily like, doing things you may not necessarily like to do, and working a schedule you may not necessarily like. So as an entrepreneur, it's entirely up to you. I like the fact that it's up to me completely. I set my own schedule. When I work really hard. When I don't work at all. So, and that's up to you or up to me. And then again, I get to pick and choose. And if you're good enough at what you do, you get to, like, one of the great things about being successful as an entrepreneur is that you get to pick your customers. Like, you don't have to work for everybody that comes through the door. It's one of the things that I'm privileged enough to do is to polarize my audience to the people that I want to work with and the people that I don't want to work with. So, which is fine. I mean, the things that I do don't resonate with everybody. I won't resonate with anybody. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's people who are every bit as good at what I do as I am, but of course I'm me. So I have a very particular idea of what the culture inside the company should look like, how individual customers are treated. And that speaks very much to how I see the world and how I like to do business. So churn in my agency in LeadBrain is next to nil. So churn for agencies, digital agencies, is typically around 30 or 40%. Mine's around 5. So people that
Wow.
on board, they stay on board for a long time. And that's all about value. Like it's not about how much you charge. It's about what you deliver. And we make a point of over delivering on every single front. And that's simply a choice that you make. And the dollars don't really matter to me. Like I think it's a mistake to say I need to make X amount per month or X amount per year, because then you're focusing on the wrong thing entirely. And if you focus on the right things, then the money just happens to come. So it's the cart before the horse. You can't. I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
mistake to put the to put a dollar sign in front of everything and say that's what you shoot for. I think it's completely different. Like, think of a professional sports team. If you think of well, I know hockey, so think of hockey. The coach
Mm-hmm.
doesn't come in and say we're going to win the Stanley Cup and just talk about the Stanley Cup, like the biggest prize, the most important thing in hockey. They just say we need to improve today. We need to be just a little bit better today. If each of you can make a 1% improvement, this practice and the next game, which is completely doable, 1% is nothing. But
Mm-hmm.
there's 20 guys on a team. If you're each pushing that 1%, by the end of the year, you're vastly improved. And that's where the focus has to lie. It has to rely on you being better at what you do. It has to rely on you being a better part of the team. You have to rely on you have to focusing on how all of that sort of works together, which in a business sense is just culture. And then everything else falls from that. So I have the same sort of ideas when it comes to customer retention and customer loyalty and customer acquisition and all those things.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Correct. Hmm. Interesting. So, okay. All right, let's talk about your software that you made in your entrepreneurial journey.
Sure.
So it's a health care software that a lot of people are using all around the world,
Mm-hmm.
and it helps to diagnose and treat thousands of patients. So, no, sounds like a huge project, multiple projects, not only one, right?
Yeah,
And
basically what the company was, what I realized early on is that if a doctor wants a good outcome with the patient has to be compliant. And the biggest issue with doctors that we were working with is that they have these really good tools to achieve really good outcomes, but the patients weren't compliant, which is normal. Like patient that they're in the doctor's office, they're really motivated, and then they leave the doctor's office and their motivation decreases exponentially with time. I mean, that's normal. That happens everywhere. So what I said about doing was creating really good compliance tools to be constantly reminding the patient of what they were of what they had partnered with, literally what they had partnered with their doctor for. And it could be anything. At the time it was really anything. But specifically, we were looking at the company that I was doing this for, the differential diagnostic bits for, was for nutraceuticals. So they were the largest supplier of nutraceuticals to allopathic physicians, which means that in the States in particular, doctors were allowed to recommend things other than just pharmaceuticals. So it could be vitamins, it could be supplements, it could be all the things that that can help a patient achieve better outcomes. And the first course of treatment was always to approach this naturally in some way that wasn't automatically pharmaceutical. And that's a huge win. That's basically a lifestyle choice, but it's a huge win across the board. So you can treat a lot of age-related chronic degenerative diseases with lifestyle choices. Like, just think of diet. I mean, it's a very obvious one. I can drink Coca-Cola all day long, although it tastes like, I love Coca-Cola. It doesn't bode well for my long-term health outcomes. So
true, true.
I took what they were doing and said, okay, you guys have a patient compliance problem. You don't have a doctor problem. You don't have a diagnostic problem. What you have is a patient compliance problem, because if the patients were compliant, they would, number one, they would be patients for more than just that one visit. So if their outcomes improve, the patient comes back, right? So that's two wins, right? Two wins in a row. And then if the outcomes continue to improve, you have word of mouth. So you have three you're killing basically, three birds with a single stone, as opposed to addressing them individually. So the differential diagnostic tools were my approach again was for patient compliance, which really only means engagement. So we were engaging with patients after they left the doctor's office in every way that we possibly could. Reminders and goals and gamifying and all those things. And you can do it 100 different ways. And we started a long time ago, so it was very, very, at the time it was very simplistic, and it since has become something far more sophisticated. But the end result is the same, and you can see the same thing now when if you book something on Calendly, for example, you don't just get to book it and forget about it. You get reminders, you get emails, and you get texts, and you get onboarding. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to talk about. Or do you have questions? So that's all that's trying to do in our context is ensure that I become, as a guest, I'm compliant, right? I actually show up and have something to say. We've got something to talk about. And if Calendly didn't have those tools that were built in, then you would have to build them in somehow. And you can see that in just about every context that exists now. This idea of compliance, of having your customers show up when they say they're going to show up, for example, or actually, again, just meeting the customer where they are and talking to them in a language they understand. So that's evolved right now when it comes to, again, the software. We're using AI to have very specific conversations with very specific patients. So the doctor will say something in the visit, that conversation gets summarized in AI, and we summarize in the doctor's voice, not some, because we use very finely tuned prompts that are related specifically to that doctor and the language that doctor likes to use and the way that he likes to treat. So the diagnosis is all pretty standard, but the prognosis is something different. Every doctor is different. And then the conversations we have with every patient is different. So you have a patient who has a PhD in geology. You're going to talk, that patient is going to expect different things, or you'd have to relate to that patient differently than you would have to relate to someone who's, say, an elementary school teacher, or someone who's working in Granville Market, in the fish market, which is that's the entire gamut of patients. So you have to speak to those.
All of them will describe the same problem completely different ways.
Yes, exactly. And then they'll have different concerns. Like some patients will be vegan, so some patients, so you have to talk to them in that language. If it's a lifestyle choice, you have to ensure that you're recommending options to them that are commensurate or that are congruent with their lifestyle. And it's the same thing when it comes to, some patients are concerned about comorbidities. Some patients are concerned about drug interactions, and we know that because we have data on all these patients, and we use prompts to ensure that we're speaking that language, or finely tuned prompts to ensure that we're speaking the right language to the right patient, and that helps them become compliant. Then they come back to the clinic. So it's this positive feedback loop that we're engaged in.
Interesting. It sounds like a really good idea. So you basically, how about security? Are you like self-hosting the LLMs, or like how do you approach it?
Well, we have security. This is the clinics. The clinic that I described, with the conversation we're having with patients, is the big clinic, the one where I'm the CTO of. But that's in Canada, so we have very specific security concerns when it comes to that sort of thing. But that's just a country by country thing. You just have to meet those requirements. It's not hard. Other clinics are doing the same sort of thing. So it's, and of course you have to be careful about the obvious things, but, like medical histories that are sent out in the, sort of in the open, but we don't do those sorts of things. It's no different. Like you can go online now and get a prescription for just about anything by talking to a doctor about anything, and you'll get and certainly in Canada, and you'll get a prescription. So that's not, we don't have to reinvent the wheel there. There's already rules in place to do that sort of thing. And to make sure that we're, like, the biggest issue we have when it comes to compliance is making sure that we're compliant with the medical services billing here in Canada. So we have socialized medicine, which means that there's one billing platform. So as long as you're compliant with that billing platform, then you're basically compliant with 90% of the issues. So again, we're we've been very careful. We're very transparent about what we do with all the, with the governing bodies and authorities. We're not doing anything in the dark. That's a recipe for disaster. There are no shortcuts. I mean, that's one thing. That's one thing when you're talking about entrepreneurship. There are no shortcuts. So just be prepared to suffer, because that's the way of the world. If you're looking for a shortcut, then you're looking. You may as well just take some money out in the backyard and light it on fire. Yes.
Oh yes, oh yes. Development in healthcare is painful.
Yeah.
I remember we had this quality assurance like protocol, like software development lifecycle. Let's say, where like if the QA says it smells, I don't like it, the whole thing goes back and
Yeah.
it has to go through product again. Like legal has to check, and it was taking so long to
Yeah.
deliver a small thing
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
yes.
It's very hard to be agile in the healthcare space, right?
Hmm.
For all the things that you've described, and I've been very lucky in that regard as well by choosing not to work with too big an organization. Like we've turned down working with large hospitals, for example, as opposed to a relatively. I mean, even though the clinic is very large, it's incredibly streamlined. Large in terms of the patient volume, it's incredibly streamlined, but we've been approached by hospitals to do the same sort of thing, and then it would just be, my recommendation was that that's a nightmare, just because of the things that you've talked about. We would be so strapped down with trying to meet all the other, I won't say talking points, but all the other touch points like legal and QA and all these things, that we would never get anywhere. It would just be incredibly frustrating. We'd end up soaking up a lot of our time, just jumping through hoops. And they're not, I'm not saying they're not necessary. I'm saying that, we simply chose not to do it. And again, that's we've been lucky enough to be able to make those choices. I mean, I've been on that side of the fence before, when it's a choice you sort of have to make, whether you may not really want to, but it's nice to know what you're getting into, and it's even nicer to know what you're getting out of when the time comes.
Yes. True. Interesting. Yeah, so smaller clinics are definitely much easier to handle, less admins, less clinicians, easier to agree probably on very different features. And you do not need to write crazy big documentations. And probably, I assume you still have to comply with some sorts of certifications,
Oh yes, of course.
right?
Yeah.
But it's not all of them. I remember we had all.
All.
Just
Yes, exactly.
crazy.
Yeah. Well, but there's a huge demand for working for developers to work in healthcare, in that niche, in the relatively small niche, just because there's a huge demand for automation. Healthcare is very expensive no matter where you are in the world. And the more you automate, the cleaner the clinic is, in terms of clean in the sense that it runs efficiently, that the person you hired to do this job does that job, and just that job, as opposed to this and this and this and this and this. So for someone who's a good developer can walk into a clinic, this is one of the things that we would do. We'd walk into a clinic, we'd look at what everyone does, just look over their shoulder and say, okay, we can automate this, we can automate that, and we can tie that into whatever electronic medical records platform you're using, whatever billing platform you're using. And by doing simple, by again, this is this 1% idea. We're gonna improve the efficiency of everyone sitting at a desk by 1 or 2 or 5%. And if there's 5 or 10 people working in the clinic, that's an automatic win of 20%. So if you can make a 20% improvement in efficiency, you basically have a friend for life. So, and there's a huge demand for that in every business,
Yes.
especially in smaller business, and especially with AI. So, I think we're at a cusp now in development, where the development tools are so good and the development tools are so fast, and you can prototype something so quickly that you can make incredible strides now, that in a week that would have taken you a year before, just in sitting down and just in terms of code volume. And you can do it just by walking
Yes.
from workstation to workstation. And it's a huge win, because most of these businesses, there's no clinics that have basically very few clinics that have a dedicated IT staff whose only job is to make software work and run for everybody. So, which is different than, say, Oracle, right? Or different than Google. So, I think there's a huge demand, and we're going to see that demand
Completely.
explode as the barrier to entry to coding comes down, because it used to be very high. As that comes down and down and down and down, and people get access to better and better tools, you'll see that I think that the demand for the kinds of work that I've been doing for the better part of my adult life is going to be exploding into the marketplace in general.
So talking about AI, I hire people like developers and do some assessments, technical assessments, and like was figuring out the new coding challenge that would be done live, and incorporated like a requirement in it to use AI. And what a confusion. I didn't thought that it will confuse people that much. As like, we do, it's like tic-tac-toe game. So before the call, prepare backend and front end, on whatever language we need. And then, there has to be like authentication, basic things like connect to DB, blah, blah, blah. And then when you're on the call, it's like, here's the task, it's tic-tac-toe. And please use your preferred LLM like ChatGPT, Cloud AI, or whatever. And you can use your IDE also on AI, like on
Yeah.
steroids. And they're like, what? What do you want me to do?
Yeah.
It's so people got used. Yes.
No. We had the same coding challenge, but the coding challenge we at the time was to write a program. It was very simple. You could do it in like 5 lines, but it was pre-AI. So the coding challenge was simply to take, to create an array of random numbers of 10,000, and then pick off numbers in that array until you're left with one, and that was it. There was, you would have an array of a one-dimensional array of one, and you pick a random number of that one, which has to be that one, and the answer is one, basically, like one element in the array. And I'd say that, and these are people coming out of university with software engineering degrees, and I'd say 7 out of 10 people couldn't solve that problem. They'd end up with and the idea was, okay, we want to hire you, solve this problem. And 7 out of 10 people couldn't do it. Just exactly like you've described, exactly the same way. It's like, oh my God, how do I do this? But they would come back to us with, my machine ran all night, and because it's trying to pick a random number from a random number and anyway, it doesn't work. It's like trying to pick the lottery, right? And they couldn't see the forest for the trees, and they couldn't understand the task you have to have a creative solution to a relatively what looks to be a thorny problem, and the solution is elegant when you do it correctly. So this idea of I was smiling about the code. We haven't done it for a while because it's maybe it was in my past, but this idea of a coding challenge that people come to you and just look at you with a blank stare. But I can do this, right? That was the other thing. I can add 1 + 1 and get 2 most of the time.
Like if you introduce AI, it basically, you also mentioned earlier that with the help of AIs, now you can code much faster. That needed like weeks or months, you can do in days or a couple of days, So it also means if you use it in coding or even in those challenges, it is already like implying that the output of that 1 hour call is like dramatically larger and different. So it's fascinating that, with those technologies, we can do so many things that maybe not the strongest decisions, probably, but it's like easy decisions can be done by AI that human could do, but that also means that you have to do way more hard decisions.
Yeah, you have to, when you're writing code in AI, you have to know what you're doing, because the code will not, it doesn't, just because AI spit out a bunch of stuff that's nicely formatted and commented and looks good doesn't mean it is good. you have to know enough that it's either going to work or not going to work. And when it doesn't work, you have to know why. So you still have, there's still, and it doesn't matter what you get AI to do, you still have to look over it with a human eye. And I think that will always be the case. I don't think that's ever going to change. And I mean, when they talk about general AI, maybe, but who knows? It's still a programmer somewhere writing some code. So again, there's this built-in limit to it. And I think of it, it's more like, if you can get AI to build you. If I ask AI to build me a skyscraper, it'll do everything perfectly, but it will not decorate the inside of it. So you as a human have to go in there and actually turn it into a usable, livable space, as opposed to this skeletal structure that looks right, but doesn't do anything yet. It just looks like a skyscraper. To actually turn it into office buildings and residential space and commercial space and, public space and waterfalls, all the things that actually turn it into something useful, you have to do that. The human still has to do that. AI can basically be pointing the fingers in the right direction, but it's not enough yet.
So it's probably a scope limitation. If you ask to build a whole building, it's just too large of a scope. It cannot still comprehend the whole thing. After all, it's generating most likely next symbol in the sequence from your prompt.
Yeah, and it ends up going over there somewhere, right? Because it's gone. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
so that's one of the ways we've been successful with it. When I talk about fine tuning for individual practitioners, that's scope limiting, right? That's saying we're gonna constrain that AI this way, and the prompts they can be in the order of 1,000 words for an individual practitioner or an individual patient. So once you have it, generalized for a patient, then you don't have to write a 1,000-word prompt for every patient. You might only have to make a few tweaks, and that's easy to do because you're not seeing 1,000 new patients a day. So, but you still, like you said, you still have to be smart about scope for sure.
Yes. All right. So another interesting topic is sailing. So tell me more about it. How did that start?
Well, my parents are Dutch. I think I may have mentioned that. And my father sailed to school, rowed to school. And when the war ended in Holland, the next year he was in the Dutch Merchant Marine, and then within a few months he was actually sailing around the world as a merchant mariner. And my whole family, both of my mother's and my father's side, were in the Dutch Merchant Marine. So there's a bit of salt water in my blood. And when I was a kid, I just grew up sailing. We were always sailing something. Even though I grew up in central Canada, I'm as far away from an ocean as you can possibly get, both the Pacific Atlantic and Arctic. But I've always loved sailing, and I've always tried to get back to the coast. I wanted to be in the Navy, couldn't do that. I wanted to be on board a ship doing oceanography, I couldn't do that. So eventually I figured I just better get my own boat and do it that way. So that's what I did. I ended up getting my own boat, and I have a bit of a historical bent. So my sailing has always been I'm trying to do something in a historical context, and I've always tried to have some scientists on board. So I've taken PhD students who are studying the genetic distribution of Sitka spruce out to some wild place. At sea, I've done observations for micro and macro plastics. I've done throwing current drogues over the side in faraway places so that scientists can study surface circulation from satellites, bird observation. So I've been able to combine my historical bent, which is how Canada got mapped, how the world's oceans got mapped, sailing in the wake of Cook and Bligh and all the other famous navigators and explorers and cartographers that you would know, and then combining that again with their contemporaries as to how and when Canada was mapped. So I can solve my I want to go to sea problems or bent. I can solve my historical interest bent, and or maybe passions, and I can solve my science passions. And I've been able to do that sailing. So it's kind of a mix of all things bundled together. And it's one of the ways that I can turn my mind off. It's very difficult when you have all this stuff going, as you know, as an entrepreneur, and you always have 1,000, have 1,000 things that have to get done and 1,000 things rattling around in that big empty space between my two ears. So when I get on a boat, I can sort of put all that away, and then simply, because you have to sail the boat, you got to be focused on sailing the boat. So, that's how I've been, like I said, I've been doing it for a long time, and it afforded me the opportunity to get on a boat when the government wouldn't pay me to do it. So there you go.
Nice. It sounds fascinating. It's I would like to do something like this someday.
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, you're in a good spot. I mean, there's nothing wrong with sailing the Baltic and Scandinavia. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. So
I was like elevating my license and had to speak 24 hours in the sea,
oh yeah.
and we were sailing for like a couple of days to Latvia. Against the wind, so it took
Yeah.
like forever.
Yeah. Well,
We like did that saw.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I did that I sailed upwind for close to 6,000 nautical miles when I went around the world. So I can feel your pain because when you have to go upwind in a sailboat, it's like sticking needles in your eyes, right? It's about as much fun as, yeah, there is no fun. So
Yeah, you like sail like for forever, then you turn and then you sail forever. And on GPS, it's like tiny, tiny
yeah,
distance moved forward.
that's right. Yeah, it's called yeah, distance made good. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's been in my blood. So, and I've sailed all kinds of boats from big boats to small boats, and I love sailing. I love sailing on small boats as much as I love sailing on big boats because it's actually sailing. I almost failed out of graduate school because I was windsurfing too much. So it's been a part of my
Oh,
life for a long time.
cool. So how do you find that much time? Your job, like occupation, seems to, be quite demanding of
Yes.
your time and effort, even though you can choose a lot of things. It's like, especially in like healthcare. So that might be a bit challenging to get distant for a longer period of time. And, missions and trips that you mentioned sounds time consuming also.
Yes. Well, I think that my focus, well, I shouldn't say I've always viewed my job as training someone else to replace me. And if you don't do that, when it comes time to exit, if you choose to do that, then the business isn't really worth anything because you're gone. But if you're irrelevant in I shouldn't say irrelevant, but if you're replaceable in every way that can be imagined, then someone can just step into that business and hire someone who does something similar to you. So as long as you're focused on ensuring that the people around you can do your job, I mean, they can't do everything, of course, but they can do that. They can do your jobs, because there's more than one. And as long as you can be reached,
yes.
Yeah, as long as you can be reached by email or whatever the case might be to make a decision, because that's in the end, that's what you do. You're the guy who makes, or girl who decides you're going to go this way, or you're going to go that way, or you're going to do that thing or this thing. You don't necessarily have to do that thing. You just have to have people in place who can execute on what those ideas or what that on what that directionality is. So as long as you're focused on ensuring that you can be replaced, then you can take off. It's part and parcel of being able to work with people you like, because they know that I like to go away, and if I go away, I'll be gone for 3 months or whatever the case might be. But they also know that I work during the year. Like when I work really hard. This isn't 9 to 5 for me. This is 12 or 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, and then I'll get done what has to get done. So I will do more in a shorter period of time than most other people can do, in a full work year. And that gives me the latitude to take off more time than might be, usual.
Yeah, well, that sounds fair in that case. The question is, you probably making yourself replaceable, but you still like a stockholder, right? It's your company or part of that company, right? So if you were just, kind of employed by somebody, what would you advise for like a manager, like a CTO, how to feel about it? So it makes sense to grow like somebody who would be taking your place. because it's how you grow yourself.
Yes.
If you can, manage people at your own level, basically you means you can be senior in that position, like next level. But it's also troublesome because if you make too many people who can replace you, it might, shorten your time in that company.
Well, I mean,
Especially,
so you're right.
especially if, okay, sorry, please.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead. Let's finish your thought.
Oh, like especially, some people might be getting high rates, and that might, pour even more gasoline into the flame.
Well, there's a balance you have to strike. Everybody's replaceable. Everybody can be fired. Anybody can be fired. So by definition, you are replaceable. If I went to a venture capitalist and asked for money, the first thing they look at is replacing me. It's the very first question they're going to ask, because I'm the most expensive thing in that investment. And the sooner they get rid of me, the bigger their return on investment, as long as the company keeps going, right? So you have to understand at the outset that you are replaceable, and you will be replaced at some point in time, whether you like it or not. So it's a good thing to embrace, but again, there's a balance that you have to strike. And if you are, and nothing promotes culture in a small business than people having the idea that they can move up the ladder quickly, that they get rewarded for taking on responsibility and doing a good job, and then being part of that team and buying into the culture. Nothing creates loyalty like that. I mean, everyone I've ever known that's been disgruntled with their current state of employment is usually they may not be making enough money, which is usually is at the top of the list in their mind, but isn't what's actually driving it, is the fact that they're underappreciated and underemployed. So if you can solve being underappreciated and underemployed, then the money doesn't really matter. And if you can solve underappreciated and underemployed, the money will look after itself. So it's an automatic win. It's a win-win. So I think your job is, as the founder or the CEO, is to make sure that there's nobody underappreciated and underemployed. And there's on the converse of that is you also have to be sure that someone isn't overappreciated and overemployed, because overappreciated sows dissent, and overemployed makes a very unhappy person. So there's that balance that you have to strike. And of course it can come back to haunt you, but the chances of that are slim compared to, well, I guess it's a risk reward thing. The rewards far outweigh the risk. And it certainly allows you, I mean, it's your idea, right? It's your idea that's driving the whole thing. So the sooner you free yourself up from the things that you don't necessarily do well, the better off the whole company is going to be. So, and it also speaks to that individual, that entrepreneur, knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are. You should always be working towards your strengths, and of course be well aware of your weaknesses. But if I need a lawyer, I don't decide I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to go out and find a lawyer, right? If I need an accountant, I'm not going to, I'm going to go find a good lawyer, right? Who knows me, knows what I want to do. And I've worked with before, and we speak the same language and all those things. The same goes for accounting. So I know what my weaknesses are. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. So I'm not going to focus on them. I'm going to focus on my strengths. So I think it's a bit of a, I don't necessarily agree with focusing, on your weaknesses. I'm going to become better at being a lawyer. The answer to that question is no for me. I don't need to become a lawyer. And if I have weaknesses in coding, which I certainly do, then I'm not about to learn, a different language. I'm going to go hire a coder who knows and breathes that particular language. In the same way for your coding challenge, when you say, okay, do this in the ID of your choice and the language of your choice. And okay, that's great. Maybe you have somebody who's really good in a particular language on a very particular IDE. And sometimes the job that you get that falls into your lap needs that specific, skill set. I mean, when we were first starting out, we were programming in esoteric languages because they were right at the cutting edge. It was the only thing that could do the job. So, and they were very particular. There was people primarily out of the graphics business or graphics and 3D rendering business or fields that knew those languages and knew those platforms. And code is this code. Like when I was writing code for, oceanic scaled 3D turbulent models, And it wasn't a stretch to write differential diagnostic software because it's just a different set of rules.
Okay. Interesting. Well, yeah, I agree. It depends on a lot of variables.
Yes.
Saying
Yes.
it's really complicated.
It's complicated. Yeah, it's complicated, and it's you're absolutely right. It's counterintuitive, right? There's this counterintuitive element, but you can see from if you're not looking at it from your perspective, like if your end goal is never to exit, for example, that the business is going to die with you, then that's going to be a different question. Right? But if the end goal is to exit in some way, shape, or form, then or to have something that lives on, that you can let's say you want something that you want to pass on to a son or a daughter, because my father was a land surveyor. He wanted me to be a land surveyor. So you have a business that you want to have some sort of legacy footprint. Well, that's a different question again, right? But like you said, it's complicated because these things are counterintuitive and they're situationally dependent. But if you take let's say a 30,000 foot view of them, then I think it's easier to see, it's easier to see where the benefits lie and what the real risk reward ratio is. But my focus has always been culture. I think if certainly I don't want the people that are working for me or that I'm working with to be unhappy. I just can't imagine that. I can't imagine myself in that space and enjoying it. So, and culture to me again is that people are recognized for their achievements and they're well rewarded. So to me that's foundational culture, and that you're doing something good, not just in the community at large, but for your customer base at large. So there's foundational elements of culture in your business that are going to impact this idea, of replaceability that seems counterintuitive. So, from the inside looking out, there's the forest in the trees that you can't see, but from the outside looking in, you're going to get a slightly different perspective. So this outside looking in perspective is important because that's part of the balance.
Correct. Well, I completely agree. Culture is the foundation of the business and longevity of the teams and how everybody works. So it's super simple to imagine. If you replace people super frequently, there will be no built-in know-how. Nobody will know what the business is about. It's very high risk, people not caring about it basically at all because they know it might not last for long and they're just looking for something else. But if you take care, people really working there for 10 years, for example. So it's everybody's super strong. They know everything. There might be anyone probably could jump and help you to do something. Interesting.
Yeah, one of my partners way back when who left the medical field and went on to work in oil and gas. He's the co-founder and chief, but he's done everything in this company, and there's about 300 people that work in that company now. It's it's all over the United States and Canada. It's heavily involved in green energy and then originally oil and gas. But they have coders that have been working with that company now, with project managers that have been with them for 25 years, for exactly that reason that you just described. That's the culture. These people have been there long enough that they know exactly what they're doing, who they're serving, how they're meant to serve, what the end goal is, where they should start, where they should finish. It's everything. There's this bundle of knowledge that exists in those people that have been working in that place for a long time. And this isn't you're going to work in the bottle cap factory and get a gold watch at the end of your 30 years. This is a completely different knowledge base, and it's fundamental to succeeding in an environment where agility is everything. So this idea of having people who are well rewarded and who are recognized is fundamental to agility in a space like you and I are in.
What do you do with black sheeps, who sneaks into there and starts, impacting the culture?
Okay, well, the way that hiring and firing is certainly you need to hire slow and fire fast, as I said. But that doesn't mean you show someone the door and slam it behind them. you hired them for a reason. I mean, you could be, it's your mistake. It's not theirs. They are who they are and you are who they are, or you are who you are. You hire them. So, are they a black sheep? Whose fault is it that they're working for you? Well, it's your fault. Me, right? I hired those guys. So my idea has always been, basically, I have all these people I know, these people that I've run across with. This person has a certain, maybe their skill sets or personality or whatever it might be, might not work with me, but I'm pretty sure I know someone who it might work with. So I'll say, it's not working out with us. I'm really sorry. It's just not a fit, but I know some place where you might land softly. How about, would it be okay with you if I set up an interview with this other guy, this other company, where you might be a better fit than me? I can't see how that's not a win for me and for them, and potentially for this other person, because they're doing the same thing for me. They say, Bert he's this weird guy. You should go talk to him. You might fit in at their company. Maybe you're not fitting in with us. Maybe the work that they're doing is more suitable for what your skill sets are. So I think you can help people land softly. And, that's an ideal situation. Of course, things are always different. The black sheep might actually be something far more toxic than that, where you don't want them working with anybody. But then again, you can still try to help them land softly. You can still be kind about it. But you do need to, cull the herd. Like that's vitally important. That's your job. Like if you want to be like my friend, I have a lot of friends who fly, commercial airlines, like 767s, Airbuses. And they would say, everybody wants to be captain until there's captain shit to do. Well, this is the time when there's captain shit to do, right?
Right. Like in those positions, like a CTO, for example, so if you think about the hierarchy, like chain of command, all the small problems get solved in the IC level, like in the individual contributor, like solo person. They can deal with it. If they don't know how to approach the problem, they ask like team lead or the manager, right? And those guys usually solve like probably 95% of those problems. And if they don't know how to deal with it, they go to director, like somebody higher. And if that crap basically is not solvable by anyone else, you get all of that. So right. It's probably all those worst possible problems all the time coming to you, and there's nothing easy, I guess. Yeah. So it's like captain's work, like CTO, CEO, COO, like all of those positions has this.
I think the other thing too is that you can look at this from the bottom up or the top down. So you've described a problem that's percolating upstream, right, or percolating up. Mm-hmm. So when those problems land at my desk, I also try to look at the other side of the coin, which is how is this working, going down the ladder. And there might be a problem in the chain itself, right? Maybe the person, like you said, the IC who can't solve a problem, who brings it up, up the next level. Maybe it's the person at that level that needs to land softly somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So there's two sides to every coin. So you can get a lot of, like, it's great to have problems. I mean, I worry when there's no problems landing on my desk because the world just doesn't work that way, right? You will suffer.
It's
That's
missing
just the way
somewhere.
It is. Yeah, you will suffer.
It's not landing on your desk.
Yeah, I had this conversation once. I wrote some software for a bunch of chiropractors who wanted to do continuing education. They wanted to manage continuing education credits. I said, okay, I can do that. So I wrote this platform from A to B, that managed all these credits, and then their job was to, my job was to deliver the application in the platform and make it all work, and their job was to go into the marketplace and sell it. But of course, being a chiropractor is not the same thing, or a healthcare practitioner is not the same thing as being a salesman. So they had trouble. So at one of the board meetings, I said, look, what kind of problems do you guys actually want? Do you want the $10,000 a month problems, or do you want the $10 million a month problems? It doesn't matter where you land on the money scale. You will still have problems. There'll be lots of them. And the scope might be different, but you're still going to have problems. You're going to wake up every day with problems. And if you think you're going to make a lot of money and wake up with no problems, I have news for you. The news is not good. There is no good news and bad news. It's just all bad news. they, to their credit, decided they wanted $10,000 a month problems, which is sort of what they're, 10 or 20,000, whatever they're making per month. But somebody else went on to do exactly what I had done, and make a pile of money. And more power to them. Like, I wasn't really interested in the selling of it. Again, I was interested in just the development of the application, and that's what they asked me to do. But the point is that, you have to look down scale, down the ladder, and see maybe there's somebody there that's not dealing effectively with, because it's easy to to pitch something across your desk and it's somebody else's problem. But again,
Sure.
that's a culture thing. But so these problems that you've described, they're an opportunity, right, on both sides of the coin. Maybe the IC is somebody that needs to be they need to be given the opportunity to be successful elsewhere, and then maybe there's an issue in the ladder itself. This person needs to be moved up or moved down, or need to understand why that person seems to be having the same issues over and over again.
True. All right. So one more question.
Sure.
So you tried a lot of things. What could you advise to aspiring innovators, who might be looking to merge their scientific passions and entrepreneurial drive, with something they like a healthcare, maybe oceanography, maybe something else, and what would be the good habit to do, together?
Well, I think that the most important thing in the world is persistence. I don't care what you do. If you do not persist, you will not succeed. Full stop. So, and of course, it's in a perfect world, your passions would perfectly align with the marketplace, but that isn't always true. And that goes, again, speaking to what we talked about meeting your customers where they are, or meeting the market where it is. So your passions may not be directly aligned with the marketplace, but I guarantee you that they will be indirectly aligned with the marketplace. And if you can see a little bit outside the box and see where your passions will be indirectly aligned, if not directly aligned, and you are willing to persist, then you will succeed. So you need to persist in a way that persistence feeds back positively into where you are headed, which means constant reassessment, which means that you're constantly reevaluating not just where you're headed, but your skill set and what you're doing and what you bring to the table. So it's if you're not prepared to grow over a lifetime, then it's going to be very hard to succeed. So imagine if we all quit after we finish. I learned to read in grade 5. Good enough. I don't have to learn anymore. Put all the books away. I can read. Like, that doesn't sound like a recipe for success. So, so I think this idea of So I think this idea of engaging in well, certainly, engaging in a lifelong love affair with your passions is a recipe for success, and then persisting. Like, I mean, if you look at the grand scale, you can ask yourself, how many rockets is Elon Musk prepared to blow up on the launch pad in full view of the whole world? Like, he's failing spectacularly. Like, most of us would never be able to withstand that kind of public humiliation, right? Where you've just blown up your fourth, Starship or whatever he's calling these things on the launch pad, and calling that a great success.
Mm-hmm.
So, but he's obviously passionate about it, and he's persisting. So there's lessons to be learned there. No matter what you think about Elon Musk, there's lessons to be learned. There isn't anyone who's succeeded who hasn't persisted. And I guess there was, I said this to my girlfriend the other day. We were talking about Lori. She might even be listening. I mentioned, Einstein. Somebody came to Einstein once and said they were complaining about their math problems, and Einstein's response was, "You think you have math problems." So, he was persisting, and if he had not persisted, he wouldn't have been successful.
True. Yeah, good one. All right. So we had really interesting discussion. We touched quite a lot of points. I talked about science, about sailing, about entrepreneurship, healthcare, and got some advices. So it's time to kind of wrap it up because we're a bit closing, very closing to the end of this episode. Is there anything you would like to tell to the audience, maybe where they can find you if they want an advice, or maybe to buy a service, or just talk, or something else?
Well, the easiest place to find me, I'm on LinkedIn, of course. So if you Google my name or search for my name on LinkedIn, you'll find me. But the easiest way to get hold of me is just bertterhart.com. And anybody who I have a thing. The thing is that anybody who emails me, I'll email them back. So it's easy to start a conversation with me, and where that goes, who's to know? And I look forward to every single one of those conversations I have, and I've had them with kids, from school kids to to retired Air Force generals. There's always something interesting to talk about, and there's always something interesting that I can take away from those conversations myself. So if you want to get hold of me and want to engage, want to talk about what I'm doing in business, what I'm doing as an entrepreneur, what I'm doing with LeadBrain.ai, or what I'm doing in the healthcare niche, or what I'm doing sailing or paddling, whatever the case might be, just bertterhart.com. And then from there, there's any number of rabbit holes that you can disappear into.
Awesome. Awesome. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Bert, for participating. And see you, everybody, in the next episode. Take care and see you later.
Thank you. Take care.